Robyn?
I'm fantastic.
You look great.
Thank you.
I'm so honored that you would talk to me today.
Really?
Absolutely.
I drove for you.
You drove for me. I am so grateful.
I don't leave my house.
And you know what? We've never met. Not like in this kind of context. So.
No, but the thing about social media, I feel like I've made so many friends from a distance that even though we've never met, there's already been a connection.
Absolutely,
you kind of already have a vibe. So it kind of feels like this is not the first time.
Yeah. And I'm pretty good with filling out authentic people. And what I can say about you from the jump, since our interaction, is you've been extremely authentic. And I could feel even the presence of your story. I don't know all of the details of it, but just from talking and interacting to you, I could feel and sense that there was some level of story and presence to what you do. And so I'm just excited that you're here talking to me today.
Okay.
So we're talking about a taboo subject. We're talking about a subject that people don't like to talk about because the stigma that it brings about sadness, but I think that is something that needs to be talked about, which is grief.
Okay.
So
when you first told me I was going to talk about grief, I really didn't connect with it. I was like, I haven't experienced that much loss in my life. But then shortly after, it hit me hard. I experience grief every week, sometimes multiple times a week. But not through a physical loss, like someone passed away, but more so grieving relationships, grieving experiences, grieving expectations that were failed, things like that. And so when you gave me that topic, like I said, it didn't connect at first, but then after a while I was like, you know what, I can't wait to discuss this because I feel like the word grief is only connected to the death of a person or an animal, but not connected to the death of a relationship, the death of your job ended. Even if you quit your job, you still have to grieve a closed chapter. And I think that because grief isn't discussed in these other contexts, we're bottling up emotions and not allowing ourselves to process and move on because no one's giving you the space and place to grieve these experiences so you can release it and literally go into your new season lighter.
That, my experience with grief was, for a long time, the only context of grief that I knew was people. Like I had two brothers to die, my father died, I had, my grandmother to pass. And so my only context of it was losing a person. But as I got older, like you said, I found out that situations, grieving seasons of my life hurt sometimes worse than people. And it was an uncomfortable place to come into because it's like, what is this I'm feeling? Like, why am I sad? Why can I move forward? Why do I feel trapped? Why do I feel like I'm suffocating?
Right.
And I came into an understanding that you have to give yourself grace and permission to grieve seasons of your life.
Correct.
Grieve decisions that you've made that didn't turn out how you thought they should. You know what I'm saying? And you just made a huge move. How has
grief? Let me cut you off right there. Grief.
Right.
Grief.
Yeah.
You hear me?
Yeah.
And honestly, this season really helped me even process that that's what I was experiencing. My story is too deep to get into, but even just being in a new territory, God moved me here. To Alabama from New Jersey, and I worked in New York, and it's so completely different. And I spent more months than not just totally rejecting the whole land. Like, I'm not leaving my house. I don't like this. I still don't leave my house, but it's not because I hate it here and I haven't adjusted. It's just a preference at this point. But it's just learning to figure out, okay, God, instead of sitting here fighting something new and feeling like this is punishment, let me understand, what do you have for me to deposit here and what do you have for me to gain from here? And when I leaned into that, I've been able to thrive. I've been able to do a lot better, but I had to grieve. I had to grieve the ending of a chapter. I've lived in New Jersey for pretty much most of my life. My friends are there. I'm coming to new territory. Any vices I might have had in that environment because it was familiar, I have no more. So if I could run over to my homegirl's house, or we go have lunch, or me and this person go see a play, that's not here. So then I had to figure out, well, who am I here? You know, like that's done, but who am I here? And I feel like wherever God is calling you to, the ability to thrive is on the other side of your obedience. So you called me here. I have to thrive. I have to get over what was and figure out what will be, you know, so I can move forward.
I think what you said is so powerful, because what I've learned, when you grieve people, there's a direct correlation to identity. So after I lost my brothers, I had to figure out, who am I after this?
Okay.
I had to redefine who I was in that context. And it's the same way, you just said it, it's the same way with grieving relationship and seasons. You have to figure out, what is your new identity? You were that in New Jersey, but
who am I here?
Who am I here?
What do you want me to do here? And it's funny because, well, not funny, I shouldn't say funny. I lost my dad too, but honestly, like, if I could just be real transparent, I didn't grieve him dying. I didn't like him. We didn't have a good relationship. And I'm grateful God helped me forgive him prior to him passing. But I did not grieve him no longer being here. What I actually grieved was his passing meant that whatever idea I was holding on to, if there was some fantasy that he was ever going to apologize, some fantasy that he was ever going to take any ounce of accountability and want to come around and be this dad that I'd always longed for, well, that died when he died. So what that meant is, whatever he did on this earth as my father, that's exactly who he was. That was my exact experience. And there's no other room for that narrative to change. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
So I actually grieved that more than his actual passing. And, you know, again, I feel like the more we talk about it, the more that there's room for unique conversations like this. You grieving the loss in your family is different than mine. You grieve the person. I grieved the idea of what I was still hoping for and holding on to while he was here on this earth. And so it's not the same, but in some way it is. It's still grief, and one is not greater than the other.
I can identify with you. When I got older, I realized, and whenever I talk about my parents, I make sure that I'm saying I absolutely know that they love me, and I know that they cared for me. But it's just, I had to come to a realization that some of the things that I needed and wanted as a child, they just didn't have the space and the capacity to give it to me. So there was so many years that I had to grieve what I thought parents should be. I had to grieve. I wanted this as a child. I didn't get it, and I had to grieve the reality that other people around me, I felt like other people were privileged to get it, and I missed out on something. So I even had to come into a mature place to know that I had to grieve even what I wanted for my life as a child, what I wanted from people who I felt like I didn't have an understanding back then. All I knew is that you didn't give me something that I needed, and I had to grieve that. So I can even identify with you from the place of grieving a fantasy, not even just grieving a fantasy. I won't even call it grieving a fantasy.
Desire.
An expectation. It is an innate expectation as a child to receive those things. And when you don't get them, there is space.
Bamboozled. I feel bamboozled.
Absolutely. Like, what happened?
That's
what? I remember growing up, being totally transparent, my mother was 43 when she had me, and my father was 60, and I grew up with older parents. I used to be so embarrassed by it. All of my other friends had like young, vibrant parents who were coming around, and I was stuck with, like, everybody knew that my mom was a church. Justin can't go to parties.
Okay.
Justin can't go out, and I used to always, it was a place where the older I got, I realized that I was actually, as a teenager, grieving my life. I didn't like this. If I had a choice in what God gave me, I wouldn't want this. And I had to come to understanding where it was okay for me to acknowledge that. And I had to heal and know that the timing of my life and what God allowed for me to be born into was meant for a reason.
Right.
But it took maturity. It took years for me to even come to grasp that you grieved that. You wanted something different than the cards that you were dealt, and you weren't happy about it.
Well, and there's shame, right? So you had both of your parents. Were they in the same home?
They were.
Right, so in the same home. And so the world that we live in, there's a lot of shame, unspoken shame. So it's like you also have years not voicing what you felt to even get to the understanding that it was grief, because how dare you complain? You got both your parents.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, you got people who don't have both their parents, who don't have either of their parents,
Right.
being raised by grandparents. And so it's like, yes, I get it. That's probably a lot for you. But let me communicate the fact that I'm still grieving my story. And yes, I have both my parents, but they're older, and this experience is at times uncomfortable for me. And it's a lot of the times there's shame that we carry where we won't even speak up because we feel like no one's going to understand, and then we feel like, we're whining and they're not going to get it. So I'm glad that you finally got to the point where you can actually be really honest, with honor for your parents, but still honest about your experience.
Absolutely. Because, like you said, shame will make you feel like you're ungrateful. Or shame will make you feel like you can't say that because,
Right.
you like I said, it's ungratefulness. I felt like if I voiced it, I was, making a mountain out of a molehill. And so for years, it was an unspoken thing. And the older I got, it didn't go away. It turned into bitterness, and it turned into, it manifested like I would be on the phone with my mom and she would say something to make me mad, and it would just something small, and it would just make me like, I got the phone with you. But it's because I had never addressed it. It wasn't a conversation that I had with her or anybody, and so I didn't know how to deal with it. I didn't know where to go, and so it would manifest in different areas of my life. Then it started manifesting in relationships with other people, because if I felt like you didn't give me what I gave you, or if I had an expectation of what I thought you should be to me and you didn't give it to me, you hurt me. And so I had
now you gotta go. I gotta cut you.
Now I gotta cut you off. And so
I understand. I truthfully speaking, I battle with that to this day. One thing I'm good at is cutting somebody off, and I've worked on it. I'm still working on it, because sometimes, and at times, I've told myself it was okay because it's self-preservation at some point, right? And so when something triggers you, naturally, your animalistic nature is going to want to lock up to protect yourself. Yeah. And I think that that's okay, but what's lacking that makes it toxic is balance. And that has been the thing I've been introducing for myself, and adding grief back in is just, what am I grieving? What did I long for from this person? Was that a healthy expectation? Were they aware of the expectation?
Absolutely.
And what can I do from here? Is this salvageable? Because some relationships, you've allowed the toxicity to go on so long, it's really like you just scrap the whole thing. It's not even worth the conversation. But is this salvageable? Can I go back to have a conversation with this person and say, hey, look, this is the experience. I understand I didn't share it with you. This was my expectation. This is what I need, right? And it's okay if that's not what they want to provide, but you put your cards on the table and you move forward. And this experience, and I say this experience because through the quarantine, I moved. And being in Alabama, there's been a lot of silence, a lot of just in the house pretty much by myself and processing. And that's when I fully developed an understanding about grief, and I've been working through my process. Now, some relationships have not been able to survive me now coming to this awakening, and that is okay. I still give them honor for what they've poured into me and what I was able to pour into them. But if we're done, we're done. But I appreciate learning how to grieve, learning how to have conversations about the grief. And then on the other side of it, we're able to put healthy expectations on the table and say, like, are you cool with this? And then I think the relationship can wind up being better.
Absolutely.
And
I think another thing that I've learned through this process is self-awareness, because a lot of times it's so easy, it's comfortable to point and say what they did and what they did to me, but it's really, really hard to acknowledge what the role you played and how you could have changed and how you were immature and how you had like expectations that were just stupid. You know what I'm saying? How you played a part in the process. And I think for me, that has been the biggest thing for me.
That's your struggle.
That's my struggle.
I'm the opposite.
For real. But over the last year,
I have a hard time saying, you know what, he was really trash.
Really?
I'm going to pick myself apart first.
Really?
Yeah, I'm the complete opposite of you.
Wow. I'm all, and now I've come into, now because of certain situations that I had in my life, and because of certain relationships that kind of had a lot going on, I'm more, at first I was always, let me figure out what they did wrong to me. Or let me see, I know they did me wrong. I'm a good person. That's how my mind functions. I'm a good I'm a good friend. I know right. They got to be a bad friend.
Right.
And it was God began to deal with me about, no, you are not without error, and you have problems. You have things that I use situations to point out to you, and I use circumstances in your life to cultivate and to prune you, and it's up to you to be self-aware. It's up to you to stop, because pride doesn't want you to do that.
Right.
Pride says, I'm always right. It's always them. Pride says, you're never wrong. It ended because of them, but it takes humility. And God has been giving me a lesson on humility. I had a huge, unwanted lesson on humility. Examining myself.
I feel like what you just did right there, I feel like that's a whole nother session to really unpack what that was. Like, no. It sounds like it's still sitting right here. It's right here.
No, for real. It's like getting to a place now where I'm always trying to examine, not even in a critical or unhealthy way, but in a sober way. I'm trying to examine, how can I be better? Looking at situations in my life, not so much as looking at the bad, but figuring out, even in this, what can I learn out of this? How can I be a better person? How can I move forward? Because so many people, and this is the risk you run when you're the opposite. You run the risk of being a victim. You go through your life not fully healing and moving forward, and you're trapped. And I told myself, I made a promise to myself, I don't want to be trapped. I don't want to be a victim. In every situation, whether it's self-inflicted or somebody else did something to me, I want to learn a lesson about myself.
Right.
That I can move forward with the lesson from it to be a better person in the end.
Right. So, hi, I'm the opposite.
Hello.
How you doing? So I want to say I've been in therapy pretty much my whole life. I started in 7th grade, so which was great, but I've been in a self-reflective stage since then, and so what would happen is, so I was the only person in my family going to therapy. Now, everybody needed therapy.
Absolutely.
But apparently I was the only person willing, right? And so, but at that time though, it taught me that something must be wrong with me. So I would pick everything apart and try to figure out, well, Robyn, what could you have done differently? If people are treating you bad, what's wrong with me that they would do this? And so and honestly, the foundation was an identity issue. Enter my dad. But, But now in adulthood, it's like I'm learning to embrace it's not always you, but I'm extreme. So I'll go from this side to immediately this side, right? So then it was like, okay, not protecting myself and thinking I'm probably hurting someone else to cutting everybody off. So the minute I started to realize that there are people that are hurting you, what they did was wrong, hey, that kind of was malicious or whatever have you, I didn't really know how to live in the in-between. I just shut down. And so that space you were talking about, working within, I'm actually working to come back there and figure out how to be reflective, be accountable, but not to the point where it's toxic, where I'm picking myself apart. It's self-loathing. I'm believing that, everything I'm doing is wrong. But then also finding a healthy balance to really look through clear lenses. What's in front of you? Who's in front of you? What are their true intentions? Why would they do that? And you know what? Sometimes being okay, I'm not going to get the answers. The answer is in my gut. I just don't feel right.
Yeah.
And that's okay too.
Absolutely.
So I'm trying to find this happy place and not being so extreme. But check on me next year.
Okay. Well, I just want to appreciate you for having this conversation with me. What you said and what you offered. I didn't know I knew a little bit, but all of this is just.
Listen, we could unpack so much, but I could have brought the file and everything, you know.
But yeah, people need this transparency because a lot of people think that, like you said, grieving is somebody going into the ground. When it's not all the time that sometimes it comes in the form of transition and leaving and closing a door and opening a new one. So thank you for it.
I do want to say this part real quick.
Okay.
Because I think when people discuss things, I'm always looking for, and what did you do? How did you get past it? And I want to make sure I don't leave anyone without this. And so what has helped me through a grieving stage was my relationship with God. Leaning on him. And if anything, if there was anyone that would listen or watch this and want to know, like, well, what do I do now? I would literally just tell them to get quiet and pray and ask him to reveal all things, because that's 1,000% all he wants to do. And he wants to guide you and let Holy Spirit let you know who is in your life. Like, one of the questions I heard today was like being able to ask God, what has to go in this season? What within me has to go in this season? Who has to go? And be okay to really receive that and be reflective, but then also be honest about the people around you. So those answers all come from God, not from a person. God.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for having this conversation. It's been healing for me, and it's been like a little therapy session for me. So I just want to thank you.
This was cute.
It was fun, wasn't it?
He has a whole camera crew. It's 3 guys. It's this whole thing.
Y'all,
I'm so
being
proud
modest.
of you.
She's not a stranger to this. So
No. But the thing is, when you asked me, I just said yes. I didn't know if it was going to be at your house, if it was going to be at the church. Did I ask questions?
You did it.
I didn't ask questions. We could have been on. We could have been on FaceTime. We could have been in the car.
Absolutely.
I didn't know, so I'm very proud of you.
Yeah.
I think this is amazing. And what's amazing is the investment you're putting in. It's not just for you, this is for others. So thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for being here.